Back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video we're going to be talking about something that I didn't really expect to be talking about this offseason, and that is that Gordon Hayward in all likelihood wants to opt out of his player option and not return to the Celtics next season. And ordinarily, this wouldn't be that big of a deal. Gordon Hayward's a good player, but it's not like he's an all-star caliber guy or anything. But what this means for their roster, for their salary cap situation, what this means for Hayward himself, all this stuff is actually really intriguing and interesting and can alter a lot of things, not only for the Celtics this offseason, but a couple of things around the Eastern Conference as well. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day, and we are on the push towards 100,000 subscribers. And I would be really appreciative if we could get there sometime by the end of the year. That would be really awesome. You can also leave a like rating on the video. It helps me out a ton. It helps the video get to more people on YouTube, and it lets me know that you're enjoying the content as well. You can also check me out at the various socials that I have at the bottom of the screen: Twitter, Twitch, as well as the Discord link, which is down in the description. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so Gordon Hayward is a player that I honestly did not anticipate putting a whole lot of thought into this offseason unless he was part of some big star trade for the Celtics, because he does carry a $34 million player option for next season. And given his injury history and given the fact that he had a pretty good season but nothing mind-blowing, I'd assume that he was going to opt into that money, become a 2021 free agent when there's going to be a lot of teams that do have money. And if he has a good year this year, whether it's in Boston or somewhere else, I figured, okay, Gordon Hayward could probably get not a $35 million contract, but a pretty nice deal in 2021. It seemed pretty clear cut. But it was reported yesterday that he wants to leave Boston. He is really considering turning down the money, and not just turning it down to, sign a new deal with Boston, but just to straight up leave. And this is, shades of what happened to this team last offseason as well. People kind of assumed that Kyrie was going to leave, but then a little bit out of nowhere, Al Horford declined his option and ended up going to Philadelphia for a huge deal that is now considered to be probably one of the worst contracts in the league at this point in Philadelphia. But that move specifically for Horford not only came out of nowhere for the Celtics, but allowed them to do some things that they hadn't anticipated they would be able to do, like sign Kemba Walker to a max contract. Now, to be clear, I don't anticipate that happening here for Boston in terms of them suddenly having max contract space. Once Horford declined that option and Kyrie left, they made some moves, including trading away Aaron Baines to get the max space that they used to acquire Walker last offseason. That is not an option for this team. But firstly, let's talk about this for Hayward, and then we'll talk about some things for Boston. So I kind of understand where he's coming from, because there's two ways to think about this as it relates to the injury history of Gordon Hayward. The first thought is you opt into the $34 million because you're someone that's had injury issues, and if you have an injury-riddled season this upcoming year, maybe you don't get, that much money the following offseason. So why don't you just opt in? You take the money that's on the table now, and you worry about the long-term security later, and you take the lump sum. Whereas the other side of that coin is you opt out early, you sign a longer-term deal coming off of, had some injuries, but still a pretty good year. Someone probably will give Gordon Hayward a 2 to 3 year deal, give him a bit more long-term security, certainly not at the same annual value, but still you take advantage of the long-term security there. I don't really know what the best choice is there for him, but it also seems like this is coming down to a bit of a team fit issue, that he just, for whatever reason, just doesn't want to be in Boston anymore, wants to go somewhere where maybe there's more opportunities, or maybe it's just Boston is almost haunted for him at this point based off some of the injury stuff that he's had to deal with there. And if he wants to leave, I don't blame him for it at all. But how this impacts the Celtics this offseason is really interesting, because your initial thought here would be, oh, he's declining $34 million for the Celtics next season. They're going to have a ton of cap space. Well, they're already at 140, assuming that Hayward opts in, and he's really the only variable for their offseason cap space. They don't really have any expiring contracts. And if he does opt out, that puts them, down towards the 106 number, right? The problem is we have no idea what the salary cap is for next season yet, for this offseason. That number has not been revealed. The previous projection was right around 119 million, which means that the Celtics would have a little bit over $10 million in salary cap space for next season to be able to do something. And honestly, if you're a Celtics fan and you're looking at that, and maybe you're not a huge fan of Gordon Hayward, having between $10 to $12 million to bring in a big man that fits on this roster isn't the worst thing in the world. The problem is, and one of the worst case scenarios here, if you are a Boston fan, is this idea that Hayward would opt out, but the salary cap number is set somewhere where it was this past season, which is right around 109 million, which only leaves them a few $1,000,000 under the salary cap, and you're losing out on a player in Hayward that, say what you want about him, but he's a pretty important part of the rotation. And so, yes, you've decreased the expenses of the roster up from 140 down to under $110 million, assuming you don't sign anybody else, which is a good thing if you're trying to avoid the luxury tax and things like that. But, I mean, this would just be straight up a worse roster if Gordon Hayward opted out and they didn't have the cap space to bring in a big man at the 5 spot. And really, it just depends on where the salary cap ends up for this team, because again, I don't think it would be that bad of a scenario for Boston if he did opt out and the salary cap was at 119 and they could use $10 to $12 million to bring in somebody at the 5 spot, which is a position that they desperately need to upgrade. And in that way, they wouldn't have to upgrade that position via a trade. But worst case scenario is Hayward opts out, so you're losing that player in the rotation. The salary cap is set about 108, 109. And then really all you have is a couple $1 million plus the mid-level exception, which you would have had regardless, even if you were at the 140 number if you chose to use it. So that's not a great scenario for Boston. The other way that this impacts them that honestly might be a bigger deal than Hayward not being on the roster or having salary cap space or not having salary cap space is in any scenario in which the Celtics wanted to make a big move this offseason and try and trade for a star or a semi-star or whatever, someone with a big salary. Gordon Hayward was involved in every single one of those deals because as you look at their contracts, they don't really have any other players on the roster that they would be willing to trade in some types of deals like that other than Gordon Hayward that also have salary cap numbers that can kind of make everything work via a trade. Marcus Smart could be involved, but there's a big difference between what he's making and $34 million. Hayward is a lot closer to what those stars are typically making in the trades you would be making. And at this point, Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum are going to be in Boston. I don't think that there's any reason for them to look at moving either one of those guys, and they would rather complement those two players rather than move either one of them via a trade. So that is a huge, huge impact of this thing. And maybe one of the reasons that Hayward wants to leave is he's realizing that if he leaves now, if he opts out, he at least has control over his next destination. But if he gets moved in a star trade, he has no idea where he's going to be ended up moving. And maybe that's one of the reasons he wants to opt out. So at the end of the day for Boston, maybe some of you saw this video and you thought this isn't worth talking about. Like this is, okay, he opts in or he opts out, whatever. Gordon Hayward's not that important. It's not just the player, but it's so much more about the salary cap and the potential salary matching via a trade. This is a really big deal for Boston, and if I'm a Celtics fan, I would rather him opt in, if I'm completely honest at this point, because I would anticipate the salary cap number not going up to 119. I have no idea what it's going to be at, but I think it's unlikely that they're going to have significant cap space even if Hayward opts out, and whatever exceptions and luxury tax exceptions and things like that they would have at the 140 number, they're going to have pretty similar options, even if their salary cap, or even if their salary, their payroll is down at 106. So really, it doesn't benefit them if Gordon Hayward does opt out. They lose the player, and it doesn't, help them with their flexibility, and they don't have that in a star trade either. So lots of negatives here for Boston, not a lot of positives, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't be shocked at all if Gordon Hayward opted out, to be completely honest. The more that I've thought about it, the more that I've gotten past just the huge salary number he would be making next season, like I think Gordon Hayward could not necessarily demand $20 million, but like between 10 to 15 on like a 3 or 4 year deal, I don't think is unrealistic at all if you're someone that wants to take a risk on Hayward being healthy. Someone like the Atlanta Hawks, maybe, that has some cap space, that knows that they're not really going to be able to, get any of the big time players in next offseason. So why not bring in someone to be that secondary playmaker, to be a bit of a scorer alongside Trae Young? That wouldn't be a bad option, and I don't think that they would be upset at all to bring in Gordon Hayward on a $10 to $15 million a year deal. So for Boston, this is not a great sign in my opinion. It really limits their flexibility from a trade standpoint. It doesn't help them with the salary cap the way that it would have had the cap gone up, or had this been last offseason, like when they brought in Kemba Walker, when Al Horford decided to opt out. I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but it seems like a pretty credible source. The person that reported this typically is pretty plugged in there in Boston, and I don't know, it would be a not ideal situation if Hayward opted out and they were unable to do anything else with this roster as a result of the salary cap, which in my opinion is not going to be going up. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you guys want to interact with me outside of these videos, obviously you can talk in the comment section and I will respond to as many of them as I can, but also Twitter, Twitch, and Discord, all three of which are linked in the description below. It's a great way to interact with me if you have questions to ask, if you just want to talk to me about basketball. Those are all great ways to do so. But like I said, with those things said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.